sorrow lingering behind weary eyelids. Whenever Camilla touched his shoulder to comfort him after a grueling day, Charles would unconsciously stiffen slightly, a psychological defense mechanism that even he could not control. The very nature of truth had been stripped away to make way for the survival of an institution. The monarchy was secured against an unprecedented crisis, but the price paid was the peace of mind of the man wearing the crown. The natural warmth of the past was gone. The king's gaze upon Camilla no longer held absolute trust. Instead, it was a discreet observation. A profound tragedy lay in the fact that he had to live two lives within a single soul. The question of what had transpired at Balmoral at 11 o'clock that night became a life sentence with no possibility of parole. His instincts continuously reminded him of his mother's trembling script and his wife's unaccounted-for gap in time, creating a slow-burning yet merciless mental torture. The mysterious journal in Harold Jenkins's account would remain forever unverified. They were never brought to legal light, never analyzed by historians, and no official document would ever record their existence. With the mindset of a supreme judge, yet also that of a son and a husband standing before the gallows of faith. On one side lay the timeline supporting Harold Jenkins's account, the exact convergence of time between the journal and the missing schedule, the abnormally jammed camera footage, and the hesitant, fearful look of the head nurse. On the other side stood the solid wall of evidence shielding Camilla, the signed logs of the medical team, the assertions of close aides, and her composed, naturally wounded demeanor on the night of their confrontation. As the two conflicting hypotheses were laid side but had only brought him a crown of profound suspicion, weighing heavily on his every breath. The months of silent investigation had drained the last remnants of King Charles III's strength. He began the final synthesis and analysis day. But if Camilla were truly the one who had inflicted pain on his mother's final hours, then her daily presence as queen by his side was a desecration, an unwashable stain upon the throne. He realized that this silent investigation had yielded no truth to cruel conclusions. If Camilla were truly innocent, then he was a terrible paranoid husband, destroying with his own hands the trust of the woman who had crossed a mountain of prejudice alongside him to reach this. Yet the time noted in the corner of the page, around 11 o'clock at night, aligned cruelly with Harold Jenkins's account and the unrecorded gap in Camilla's schedule. This coincidence was like a bucket of cold water thrown onto Charles's faltering faith, transforming vague speculation into the looming threat of analyze each stroke of ink, the absorption of the paper, and the pressure of the nib on the page surface. Each passing moment felt like a century to Charles. He hoped the man would look up and declare it a clumsy forgery, allowing him to lift the crushing weight from his chest. But the answer he received: hideous betrayal. The king's mind fell into a state of absolute chaos. In search of solid ground, Charles secretly ordered a veteran royal handwriting sudden encounter, a bitter and hurtful dialogue that had taken place right at her bedside, robbing a dying woman of her final moments of peace. The journal never mentioned Camilla by name. The writer used only general pronouns or left factual blanks. A man who had spent his career authenticating historical texts to examine the journal under the guise of appraising an antique document. The king sat motionless for hours, watching the expert in white gloves use a microscope and specialized chemicals to...
I'm 75 now, and I can't remember anybody except the Queen being there.
A stunning revelation has sent shockwaves through royal circles. A long-serving former aide to Queen Elizabeth II, her face flushed with anger, suggesting a tense and bitter confrontation had just taken place. Upon hearing the explosive claim, Charles immediately confronted Camilla. While the Queen consort vehemently denies to have personally witnessed Camilla entering the late Queen's private quarters alone on the night before her passing. According to the source, she emerged some 30 minutes later, has reportedly met in secret with King Charles III to expose a secret he kept closely guarded since that final fateful night at Balmoral Castle. The former staffer claimed denied everything. She was reportedly unable to provide an alibi strong enough to clear the air when pressed about her missing time frame. Adding fuel to the fire, a mysterious diary containing the late monarch's final entries has suddenly surfaced, leaving the king in a state because the Queen's health at the time had been so frail. The script was naturally distorted, making it scientifically impossible to provide a 100% definitive conclusion as to whether it was written by a hand trembling from illness or executed by a genius simulator. The journal could be genuine, or it could be a fluke. It was only a desperate impasse. After a meticulous examination, the expert shook his head helplessly, stating that the handwriting bore the flawless characteristics of the late Queen, from the looping of the letters to her signature slant. However, he gripped the journal tightly in his hand. He knew he could not stop here. The truth about his mother's final hours and the true face of the woman sharing his bed were things he was compelled to uncover himself, even if that journey might lead him to an inanimate object. It had transformed into a living entity, continuously challenging his trust, his love, and his duty. Standing before the large glass window overlooking the misty castle grounds, Charles Wallace Trap. This ambiguous result dealt a heavy blow to Charles's psyche. He realized he could rely on neither science nor anyone else to find the answer. Now the dark blue journal was no longer, and just as Camilla had said, the camera recorded the medical staff entering and leaving, and the aide carrying documents. But the terrifying part was that during the 15-minute gap Charles had discovered the previous day, the angle of the main corridor camera suddenly blurred due to a digital who understood the system. A shadowy figure, unrecognizable due to the dark angle and poor image quality, seemed to flit across the edge of the screen at that exact time. But there was doors. Charles's heart hammered. He personally pressed the slow-motion button, staring intently at the corner of the screen that showed the passage leading to the Queen's private quarters. The king's eyes strained beneath his reading glasses. Just no way to confirm who it was. Not stopping at inanimate documents, Charles began seeking access to the witnesses. He did not summon them officially, but deftly wove probing questions into casual encounters, investitures, or routine inspections. Upon meeting the head nurse, static interference lasting a few minutes, a technical anomaly that could easily have been caused by the stormy weather in the Scottish Highlands that night, but could also be the work of a deliberate intervention by someone who erased all physical traces of it. The truth no longer resided in the evidence. It lay in his own choice. He was not merely a son seeking justice for his mother. He was first and foremost the remainder of his days with a malignant tumor of doubt in his heart. He would have to continue sharing the royal bed, appearing alongside her on the balcony of Buckingham Palace and smiling next to the woman he could never fully trust again. Every time he looked at the crown atop Camilla's head, he would wonder anew if it had been bought at the price of his mother's final agony. He understood that even if that dark truth did exist, time had already erased the bearer of the crown, with the supreme responsibility for the survival of an institution. Charles's hand shook slightly as he turned back to his desk. His next movement was slow, yet bore a heartbreaking finality. He, during this sensitive transition, would instantly collapse under a scandal of the most horrific scale in modern history. Conversely, if he stopped, he would have to live as though no subterranean storm had ever swept through. Harold Jenkins, having unburdened himself of the psychological weight that had imprisoned him for years, quietly left London on an early train. The former courtier returned to his small cottage in the English countryside, choosing to live out his remainder. An invisible but unbridgeable chasm had permanently formed between the king and queen. Charles maintained his respect and courteous gestures toward his wife, but whenever the two found themselves in private spaces, works. The seamless coordination and mutual understanding between the two before the camera lenses drew endless praise from the public and the press alike, charting a narrative of enduring love and a steadfast anchor for the kingdom during this period of transition. Yet beneath the perfect veneer of state pageanting days in absolute seclusion, severing all ties with high society, he understood that speaking the truth to the king was the absolute limit of his duty. The rest belonged to history and the destiny of the reign. Meanwhile, at Buckingham Palace, Camilla continued to shoulder her role as queen. At public events, she appeared by Charles's side with a radiant, noble smile, her diamond crown sparkling under the media lights, flawless in every gesture, every speech promoting her charitable entering the Queen's chambers. It was like a hairline fracture in a flawless pane of glass. It did not shatter the glass instantly, but it was enough to destroy any faith in its resilience. Charles raised his eyes to meet his wife's, his gaze no moment the aide left Camilla's room to fetch additional documents and the arrival of the medical staff to check on her before lights out, there was a brief gap in time. Lasting roughly 15 to 20 minutes, this window was entirely unaccounted for, with no witnesses to directly confirm her whereabouts. Though brief, that missing time frame aligned with terrifying precision with the exact window in which Jenkins claimed to have seen her. All a catastrophic misunderstanding, or a wicked ploy orchestrated by the former servant. However, that relief was short-lived. As the king cross-referenced Jenkins's account more thoroughly against the timestamps in Camilla's logs, he suddenly stumbled upon an anomaly. Between the From 10:30 to 11:50 that night, Camilla's schedule appeared entirely filled with internal activities, witnessed by others. The persuasiveness of this evidence was so profound that for a fleeting moment, Charles felt a wave of relief wash over him, wanting to believe it was all tear apart the peace of his family and the monarchy itself. Was this a blackmail plot, a personal vendetta, or truly the pangs of conscience of a loyal servant who could no longer live with the lie? Jenkins made no demands, continuously clawed at his heart. What had truly happened behind that closed door at Balmoral that night? What had Camilla said to the Queen? And a profound and dark unease began to take root in the king's mind. For the first time, he looked at the photograph of his late mother on his desk with a sense of overwhelming guilt and confusion. A question. He merely stood there, his eyes cast down toward the floor, as though the simple act of shedding this secret was reward enough or the release he had long been searching for. When Jenkins was dismissed, Charles remained alone in his study, the fading dusk staining the ancient walls a deep crimson. Skepticism. Charles stared intently at the man before him, trying to parse his motives. Why had Jenkins kept this secret guarded for all these years? Why choose this exact moment just as the reign was finding its footing to utter something that could it swelled, morphing into an obsession that gnawed at King Charles III's mind for days to follow. The former courtier's description of Camilla's incensed face as she emerged from the Queen's chambers played on a loop in the king's head. Critical of all, did the wife he loved, the woman now sharing his throne, hide a horrifying truth behind her noble smile? The inner storm left in the wake of Harold Jenkins's departure did not dissipate with the falling darkness. On the contrary, from a long day of duties, she instantly sensed the shifting atmosphere in the room. The intuition of a woman who had weathered decades of tempestuous storms by Charles's side, like a slow-motion film. He knew he could not pretend he had never heard it, and keeping silent would only poison the bond between them. The decision to confront her arose not from anger, but from a desperate longing for peace of mind, and a need to shield the wife he cherished from such dark suspicions. When Camilla walked in, bearing her usual elegant grace, alongside a touch of weariness, her private thoughts or daily reminders. The spine was slightly frayed, and the distinct scent of old paper immediately filled the air, carrying with it the breath of the past. The king's hands trembled, vague yet resolute directive against granting any special roles or prominent titles to Camilla in the future of the monarchy. Most striking of all, the final entry recorded something that left Charles completely shattered, a reminder of us to finish. In them, the late Queen expressed a profound disappointment and an agonizing pain. She wrote of a great disillusionment regarding those closest to her, and issued a vote slightly as he leafed through the pages, recognizing the slender blue-black ink handwriting that grew disjointed and shaky on the final pages, a clear sign of her severely failing health during those final days at Balmoral. Upon reaching the pages, dated just before the night the Queen passed away, Charles felt his breath catch. The lines were no longer straight, the ink trailing off, as if the writer had to summon the last remnants of her strength, was something no one ever questioned until he abruptly resigned a few months after the Queen's funeral and vanished from public life. The fact that Jenkins had suddenly sent a handwritten letter pleading for a private audience, bypassing the usual rounds, checking the shutters. It was at that precise moment that he saw Camilla, then the future Queen consort, walking alone along the corridor toward Queen Elizabeth II's private quarters. The king felt. Jenkins began to speak. The room seemed to freeze. He did not beat around the bush. He recounted that at around 11 o'clock that night, when the castle corridors were deserted and most of the royal family had retired to their private rooms, he was making it. Felt his heart tighten. Jenkins went on to describe Camilla's actions. She did not knock in accordance with standard protocol, but pushed the door open quickly, as if seeking to avoid royal secretaries, had stirred a mixture of curiosity and unease within Charles. The king remembered the man perfectly, a dutiful servant who had never asked for anything. As the study door closed, severing all contact with the outside world, the atmosphere grew instantly tense when lay on her deathbed. Hearing this, Charles felt a cold chill run down his spine. That night, he too had been at Balmoral, but he had been told that his mother needed quiet and that Camilla had retired to her room early due to fatigue. For the past few years, he had lived in the belief that the Queen's final hours had against the wooden floor, carrying with her a heavy air of tension, as though she had just emerged from a fierce argument, a suffocating confrontation with the realm's most powerful woman, who passed in serenity, enveloped in love and dignity. Jenkins's confession was like a violent fracture, shattering the peaceful picture Charles had so carefully preserved. The initial shock quickly gave way to a bitter anyone's notice. The courtier, driven by curiosity and professional instinct, stepped back into the shadows of a side passage. About 30 minutes later, the door to the Queen's room opened. Jenkins maintained he saw Camilla's expression with absolute clarity as she stepped out. There was none of her usual softness. Her face was taut, her eyes etched with fury, and her lips tightly pressed. She walked in a hurry, the rustle of her silk gown echoing of deep despair and confusion. Instead of finding answers, Charles has discovered that every clue leads to secrets never meant for the public eye. What truly happened behind closed, broken only by the steady rhythmic ticking of an antique George III clock. Facing the king stood Harold Jenkins. At 65, the man bore the unmistakable demeanor of a lifelong courtier's spine, straight his step, and eventually becoming one of the most trusted retainers by the Queen's bedside in Scotland during the final days of autumn in 2022. Jenkins's loyalty closed doors during the Queen's final night at Balmoral. And will King Charles III choose to bury the truth or bring the shocking reality about Camilla to light? King Charles III's study at Windsor Castle was steeped in a solemn silence, light and soundless, and a gaze that held far more than his lips ever permitted him to utter. Jenkins had dedicated his entire life to serving the late Queen, starting as a young footman at Buckingham Palace in the 1980s, weathering the crisis of Princess Diana's death in 1997. Who had been on duty that night, Charles conversed about her current health while closely observing her gaze and micro-expressions as he subtly hinted at the atmosphere at Balmoral during those final. The hem of her uniform, a manifestation of hesitation, an invisible fear, before she offered a safe assertion that she could not recall clearly. Every clue Charles gathered, rather than clarifying the matter, pushed him further into a matrix of contradictions. Harold Jenkins ended on the borderline between truth and fabrication. This impasse began to take a toll on the king's physical and mental health. Charles realized he was trapped between two entirely opposing hypotheses, both leading. His account found substantial support in the Queen's journal and the questionably jammed camera footage. Yet at the same time, the official paperwork and the signed logs of the medical team formed a nearly flawless alibi for Camilla. No single piece of evidence carried enough weight to deliver a final verdict. Every detail hung suspended for hours. The nurse looked visibly sorrowful, maintaining that the Queen had been very peaceful, but for a fleeting second, when Charles asked if anyone had visited outside the schedule, her eyes flickered, and her hands gripped told her that something grave was weighing heavily upon her husband's mind. She did not rush to speak, but quietly took a seat in the armchair opposite him, intently reading every subtle shift on his face, waiting for an explanation. Rather than opening with standard pleasantries, Charles chose to go straight to the heart of the matter, his voice low-heavy with an underlying pain. He recounted Jenkins's allegation, omitting not a single detail from the hour of 11 o'clock that night at Balmoral to the furious expression anticipated. Yet that disbelief swiftly gave way to a look of profound hurt. She let out a soft sigh, one heavy with exhaustion and disappointment. Then Camilla's initial reaction was one of pure bewilderment. Her brows arched high, and her eyes widened in utter astonishment at an accusation she could never have on her face as she left the late Queen's quarters. The king's gaze never wavered from Camilla's countenance, attempting to catch the slightest, most instinctual reaction upon her features. Poisoned the king's mind. Camilla's denial was deeply compelling, yet it was that very unexplainable gap of time that transformed into a permanent seed of doubt, buried deep within the king's heart, leaving him to realize that the piece of his reign now stood upon an invisible abyss, served exclusively for the personal effects of the late Queen Elizabeth II. When Charles opened the box with his own hands, his heart skipped a beat at the sight of the object resting inside. It was a small, dark blue, leather-bound journal, a deeply familiar item his mother often used to record, no longer searching for answers, but filled with a bitter, agonizing torment. Camilla recognized that look in her husband's eyes. She knew that this unrecorded gap, something that under normal circumstances could easily be explained away as private personal time. Amid the vertigo of King Charles III's brooding over Camilla's missing time frame, another event struck, escalating his psychological trauma to a new height of tension. On a Monday morning, a small oak box, dulled by time, appeared on the king's desk, delivered via an absolutely secure channel reserved, had now turned into an inescapable psychological trap. A sense of helplessness washed over her face. She understood that no matter how much evidence she produced, suspicion had officially. Such an action meant he would personally strike the match to burn down the royal house his family had spent centuries building and protecting. The stability of the reign